It is. It is really good to be home. And I was thinking as Wes was talking, I'm looking at my watch, and literally 10 months from right now, the new governor will be sworn in, whoever he or she will be, and we will be out the back door like yesterday's trash. I've told people it's a little interesting being at this point. Mayor O'Hara and I were just having this conversation. Once you're not quite where I am yet. She's got a little longer, but once people start campaigning for your job and people realize, okay, this is the last time you'll do that. It's the last time you'll come speak to the chamber's lunch or your last day of the state speech. People start seeing you sort of differently. And Chrissy asked me one time, so what's it feel like now that everybody sees you as the governor who's almost about to be gone? And I said, well, it's a little like when you have when someone dies and they have the visitation of friends. And you're there at the mortuary and they have the open casket and people walk by and say, well, doesn't he look natural? You want to go, no, I'm still alive. I'm here. I'm okay. But you do realize it's at a certain point in time. And so Wes actually did a great job of talking about some of the things that's happened over the last several years. So I might change what I was going to talk about and instead of walking through where the state is, say, what do I think the challenge is for Tennessee right now? I'm going to go back 15 years ago. Mayor O'Hara and I were actually running against each other to be the mayor. And we didn't agree on certain things, but there was one thing that we both agreed on that it became part of both of our stump speeches that we talked about. And that was that we were tired of Knoxville wishing that we were somebody else. People said, well, I wish we could be more like Chattanooga. I wish we could be more like Atlanta or Asheville or pick your city. And since that time, due to a lot of great leadership, I'm so glad to see so many of the new city council members. Now there's a city council members who didn't ever have to serve with me, so it's good to see all of you all here today. But this sense of we've learned how to be our own city here and to take pride in what we have and to compare our downtowns with anybody and our neighborhoods and what a flourishing place, so many different flourishing places around the city that we'll compare that with anyone. And Knox County leadership under Mayor Burchett, and again, so glad to see so many of the commission members here. It's just that spread throughout our entire region, if you will. But it was based on this idea that, we can be that city where everybody wants to live. And I honestly think that over a period of years that's happened. And if you ask me what the challenge is for Tennessee, it would be this. We expect way too little of ourselves. We have set the bar too low for who we think we can be. And I have learned something that I will argue with anybody, is that we can compete with anybody and that we can actually lead. If you look at some of the things that are happening in Tennessee now, we honestly can lead. And sometimes when I say that, people go, well, that sounds too bold. I'm like, well, I don't know. I think we've proven in Tennessee, whether it be businesses that have started here and grown to be worldwide presence, or the way we run government, or the way we've seen dramatic improvement in education results, that we can lead. I think it starts in Wes, I appreciate you pointing out, because I think it's true, again, in the city of Knoxville, it's true in the county, it's definitely true in the state. We've proven that you can provide great customer service in government and still have the lowest price possible. After all, that's what we do in government, right? We provide things that people can't buy for themselves. Nobody can buy their own road crew or their own prison system or their own mental health network or all the different things we do. And our job is to provide the very best of that at the very lowest cost. And we've done that today in Tennessee. Our taxes as a percentage of income are the lowest in the country. We've been able to cut about $578 million with more to come. By the time we leave, it'll be 9 times more taxes cut than have been cut in any 8-year period in the state. But I'd like to think we've done that while actually increasing our service. We've done that while introducing ideas like 2 years free of community college or technical school, while we put more money into a lot of issues around the state, whether it be opiate abuse or mental health or funding K-12 education. We're putting $1.5 billion more into K-12 education than we were when we started, including $500 million of that going to teacher salaries. But we're convinced, and we've shown that you can do that. The founders had this crazy idea, the founders of our country. They said, let's let every state do it the way they think is best, and then we'll see what works best. They called it laboratories of democracy. And that actually happened. So if some state 40 years ago wanted to make people unrealistic pension promises and say, we'll promise you we'll pay you this amount of pension, and another didn't, well, that state got the right to do that. Fortunately, in Tennessee, we didn't do that, and we now have a pension plan that's fully funded and not dragging down our state's ability to do other things like other places have. But again, that's a choice that each state gets to make. Again, in Tennessee, we've decided we want to be a state without a lot of debt. We have the lowest amount of debt per person. But we want to be a state that reacts to needs. And so I'm really proud of what's happened in higher education. I see some folks from University of Tennessee here, as I see some other folks from Pellissippi. But we've said we're going to react to the changing world we live in. The job demands today are so different than they used to be. The idea behind the Drive to 55 is we know that now, by 2025, 55% of all the jobs in the state will require a post-secondary, past high school degree or certificate. And we were at like 33 or 34%. We're now on pace to actually not only get to 55% by 2025, but hopefully get there a year or two early due to the work of so many people around the state. But we want to be that state that says the world's changing. We realize people have a choice where they live and where they locate their business, and we want to be the state that reacts to that. So we've been very purposeful about that. We've said to businesses, we realize you have a choice. We realize that here's how jobs get created. I love it when people, that 300 and however many thousand jobs are created, but here's the honest truth. There's never been anybody in government that's created a net new job. Jobs get created when people put capital at risk, people like you. Folks like you decide we're going to take the capital that we have either personally or in the business, and we're going to invest that. When that happens, then jobs get created. In Tennessee, we've said, well, how can we make more of that happen? So we did things. We passed a tort reform law that attracted business here. We passed workers' comp reform where your workers' comp insurance that you pay in Tennessee is 40% less than it was 6 years ago. We recognized that, again, you had a choice where you could locate your business and invest your capital, and we hope you chose Tennessee, and that's happened. It's a competitive world out there. People ask me all the time, well, I hear that, Tennessee's one of the final 20s for Amazon and all these big projects. But the reality is real job decisions get made most of the time by smaller businesses. About 70% of our job growth is from smaller companies, and most of those are existing companies. And so we wanted to create the environment where existing companies said, we're doing really well in Tennessee. We're finding the workforce we need. We're going to invest more capital here and create more jobs. And because of that, we've been able to see that kind of job growth. Our economy has basically grown at 17% over the last 3 years, far outpacing the national average. So we decided we can be, like I said, back to the idea that Tennessee can lead, we can be the state that shows here's how you do it. Financially, we can keep taxes low, and we can still provide the service people need. We decided we could do that on the business front. We could recruit businesses from anywhere in the world to come here. Interesting, I've had conversations with companies that I never thought, or they never thought would consider Tennessee, major financial firms and others that are now saying, yeah, tell us about it. We're interested in looking and how to move. We had our big challenge now, and I think the chamber knows this. I'm not lecturing them in public, anything we wouldn't say in private, but is finding the available pieces of property to where we can move companies that want to have an enterprise of a certain size and have it be here. We have a different challenge in East Tennessee than we have most places. When I first became governor, I went to West Tennessee. I was like, wow, all this flat, open land. We don't have that luxury in Tennessee, in East Tennessee, and so we've had to work harder to find those locations. And again, local leadership has been doing that. But even with those limitations, we can do that. So we know we can compete. We can not only compete, but we can lead. And this is what a government should look like, and this is what we do to attract businesses. But the key to all that, and the reason I focus so much on education is that it is an incredibly rapidly changing world, and what we used to be able to provide in terms of trained workforce doesn't come near to meeting the standard that it needs to today. And I am thrilled that we're seeing so much educational progress today in Tennessee. Today in Tennessee, we're still the fastest improving state system in the country. Today, like I said, we were the first state to have 2 years free community college. Our 4-year school graduation rates are increasing rapidly. Our high school graduation rates are the highest they've been in history. But we have to do that just to compete. But somebody asked me, well, why have you focused on education so much? And to me, the answer is really simple. And I talk about this all the time. I don't care what your politics are. You have to recognize that we have an issue in this country around income inequality. Okay? You might be the most conservative, most liberal person in the room, but we have an issue around that in this country. Now, the question is, what are we going to do about it? And I would argue that our very best hope for addressing that comes through public education. That's why we've put $1.5 billion more. That's why we've worked really hard to increase our standards in Tennessee. It's why we've worked really hard to have an evaluation for the teacher that includes the student's outcomes. And it's why we've worked really hard to keep a year-end assessment that was part of that. I want to be really clear. If you don't hear anything else I say, we haven't just improved in Tennessee in education because we got lucky. There were some hard but specific steps that people took long before I got here that made a huge difference. And somebody says, well, what do you worry about? I worry about us not realizing those things that got us here, and people start taking those for granted, and we easily let them drift away. We had a fairly unique set of circumstances come together in this country when it came to education. Think back to then President George W. Bush and the whole idea of no child left behind. Now, the idea eventually had some issues in terms of what it played out, but it was a radical idea for a Republican president who said, no matter where you live, no matter what zip code, no matter what your background, we think you deserve a chance for an outstanding education, and we want to make certain that nobody's just saying, well, those kids in that part of town don't ever do that well in school. And so push back hard against that idea. Then followed up with a Democrat president, Obama, who did something even more politically bold, if you will. He went out and said, as part of the whole Race to the Top initiative, that Tennessee was a big beneficiary, he said, we're going to make certain that you tie the students' outcomes, how much students learn, to the teachers' evaluations. Now, traditionally, the Democrats' biggest voting base has been teachers' groups. Okay, that is not something that teachers' groups like. President Obama showed incredible political courage in going out and doing that. So the result of all that is you had a changed environment around education. Now, for those Republicans who are like, well, yeah, I didn't like it. The federal government got too involved in local education. I actually agree with that. But if you're a Republican, you have to realize they were singing our song about accountability. That's the stuff we believe in. And their push for accountability and outcomes was critical. I always say this, we believe in outcomes, not inputs. And finally, we had the whole country through 8 years of Bush and 8 years of Obama talking about, well, exactly what are our outcomes, and let's don't accept the fact that we're going to say some kids can't learn. In Tennessee, we did those things. We raised our standards. A lot of people were saying, no, we're not that. We can't do that. You're expecting too much of our kids. I spoke to so many schools where I had people saying, our kids aren't like that. Our kids don't go to school beyond high school. They're going to graduate and then go get a job. I said, well, maybe, but a lot fewer of them are going to find that job they want going forward. And so we battled about this. You're being too tough on standards. And the second thing was the whole issue around the teachers' evaluations, including the students' outcomes. Now, if you're from business, you're probably going, huh? Wait, what do you mean? You mean how much the students learn wasn't a part of the students' evaluations? The teachers' evaluations? Until 8 years ago, that was against the law in Tennessee. You could not have the students' outcomes be part of teachers' evaluations. We changed that. We've seen some dramatic improvement. And the third thing was around this whole idea of year-end assessment that actually says, are we learning what we're supposed to learn? Now, there's a whole argument about there's too much testing in schools. I actually agree with that. But we can't ever stop keeping score at the end of the year and tracking what our students learn and seeing this money that we're investing, this future of our children that's at stake, what kind of outcomes are we getting? So all that's to point back to this. In Tennessee, we can compete with anybody. We've seen that. We've seen our students can can improve faster than the others. We've seen our schools dramatically improve graduation rates, but the challenges out there still exist. And my fear is when you go through a battle and you get somewhere and you see the results, that people don't realize the battle that came before them. I worry about the same thing with our state's finances. I've had the blessing of being in office while the economy has been on an upward tilt the whole time. That's not how it will stay. There will be a time when it will get tougher. And instead of the state's revenues being up 3 to 5%, they will be down or flat some year. And we won't have anybody who's been there when the times are tough. I see Bill Dunn out there. He was in the legislature when we had some really tough years and had to make hard calls. So whether you're on city council or county commission or state legislature, realize there will come a time when you have to make hard decisions around the budget. And I hope that we haven't forgotten those decisions that got us where we are today. But I say all that to say at the end, and then we'll stop and talk about whatever you'd like to talk about. But I say all that to say I'm incredibly encouraged about where we are. The state is very well positioned to compete in the future. Again, we've paid down our debt. We've taken a lot of our other outstanding liabilities, whether it be pension or other long-term employee obligations, and paid those down. We have a good, low, competitive tax rate. We've done the things that we should. We've, in terms of like you do at your house, fixing your roof. We've fixed, put maintenance into state's buildings, whether it be higher ed or our own buildings. We've done all those things to prepare for the hard time, so that when the hard time comes, we will be in good shape competitive-wise. Same thing on business. As much job growth as we've had, we've never had as much interest in companies moving to Tennessee as we have today. I have this certain sense of franticness, like 10 months to go. We need to see if we can reel some of these fish into the boat because the amount of interest has never been that great. And by the way, I want to say this about this area. People think, well, Tennessee's growing because Nashville and the greater Nashville area is growing. All that is true. The growth over there is remarkable. But if you look percentage-wise what's happening, the growth over here is not that far behind. And it's good quality growth of companies that are going to be here a long time and are going to do what we've always done, have solid, long-term, consistent progress. So I feel very, very bullish about this area and its long-term prospects. So I feel great about the state's economic future, both our own finances and ability to recruit. And I feel very strongly encouraged about our education results. When we implemented Tennessee Promise, we liked this whole idea of 2 years free of community college for everyone. But what we didn't count on was some of the reciprocal benefit, and that was this. If you were a junior or senior in high school and you weren't thinking, I'm going to go to school beyond this, then your junior or senior year was just about, I just need to do enough so I can walk across the stage at graduation. But if you're thinking, I'm going to go to school after this, now you have a little different sense of commitment and investment. And we have seen that in Tennessee. We've actually seen students plug in and say, you know, I probably ought to pay attention to this algebra course my junior year because I'm going to take another math when I'm a freshman at Pellissippi or wherever I'm going. And so I think all those benefits are starting to pay off. We're finally making some long-term gains in our reading and literacy scores, which we've struggled with as a state for a long time. That really is the foundation of everything. So my last word, and then we'll take questions, is this. Let's not set our bar too low. We really can compete with anyone. I feel that way about Knoxville in this region. I feel this way about the state of Tennessee. Whether it's recruiting business or showing folks how government can be run, or at the end of the day, the thing that's the most important, providing all of our citizens the right to a great education. We can do that here if we just don't expect too little of ourselves. So with that, I will stop, and I think we have a good 20 minutes or so, and Mark and Amy to take questions. It's so fun to be somewhere where I actually recognize people like doing stuff. So anybody want to be the brave first? And you can ask any question you want, but it just has to be a question, okay? This is probably not the right time to advertise your new business service. There's Amy there, right there.
Okay. Thank you, Governor Haslam. I'm Drusilla Mugorewera, and I'm from Bridge Refugee Services.
We met last week, I think.
Yes, and congratulations for all these achievements under your leadership. I will ask a question about affordable housing. Affordable housing is not just our problem, it's nationwide. since you did holistic changes in education and other economic sectors, how do you envisage transformation in this area? Also, another question is that with the people in those subsidized housing, so they do not have case managers and people who are in charge of economic development. And the program, which is supposed to be temporary, is becoming permanent. So I think if you can invest some money in that area too, and those children who are living in those areas can see another model of development. Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, and good to see you again. You made 2 or 3 points. I agree that we have too many folks that it's supposed to be a temporary condition that's become a permanent. We need to figure out how to do that. Affordable housing is kind of one of those areas that's both local and state responsibility. We have Tennessee Housing Development Authority that works with our locals to come up with specific projects to create more affordable housing, which we're doing. Again, Mayor O'Hara and Mayor Burchett have both been a part of some innovative solutions. We've seen that across the state. Our challenge is to find a way. There's certain things that we get funded for out of the federal government and certain things we don't. That's one that we get limited federal funds out of. And so our challenge to do anything dramatically different than we're doing now would be to, okay, what are we not going to do that we're doing? And we're looking at a couple of issues. I mean, one of the benefits of being a mayor first is you realize that if you can solve the housing issue for folks, whether you be homeless or in subsidized housing or just in substandard housing, then you can change a lot of circumstances. So we're working on a couple of new programs through Tennessee Housing Development Authority. In the end, whatever we do, we'll do in partnership with local government when it comes to housing. Thanks. Yes, back in the back.
Governor Haslam, I am Octavia Harper. I am the mother of April Harper Jackson.
That is a great honor. That is a great honor. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. My question is, where are we in Tennessee with the Affordable Health Care Act? There's a lot of young people, young parents with children having to pay $5,000 and $10,000 deductible for just okay medical insurance. And I know at one time Tennessee opted out to be included in the affordable health care. So I just want to know, just where are we? Yeah, thanks.
Great question. So a couple of things. I'll try to give a summary and then still get right back to your point. When Affordable Care Act or Obamacare passed, it basically provided subsidized health care above 135% of the federal poverty line. So above that, you got a decreasing amount of subsidy as you went up above 135% of poverty. The plan assumed that everybody below that would be on traditional Medicaid, basically, but the split would be different. Rather than the state paying a third and the federal government paying 2/3, the state would pay 10% and the federal government would pay 90%. When the Affordable Care Act was taken to court, the Supreme Court ruled it is legal to do that. What's not legal is to force states to provide coverage of that because the states are having to come out of their own pocket to do that. So every state got to vote. I had a plan called Insure Tennessee that I thought was actually a very conservative way to address that, that actually wouldn't have cost the state any money, that could have covered folks. But other people weren't comfortable with that. The bill, I would say it didn't pass, but it actually didn't even come close enough to not passing. And we have not been able to do that. I think here's the real question going forward. At that point, to be honest with you, I'll be as blunt as I can. In our state, President Obama wasn't all that popular. In our legislature, probably even less so. And anything identified with President Obama was probably not going to get passed. The question is, going forward, if we could come up with something like that that didn't cost the state any money, that really did provide health care for folks at no additional cost, would we do that? And I think there's a chance that the state does look at that if you can meet both of those criteria, which I think you can, obviously. Now, none of that covers the people you talked about, because I'm guessing the folks, or some of those folks you talked about, if you're a young couple with 2 or 3 children, you're probably, maybe you're below that 135% of poverty level, not. The folks above that, some of those who are getting subsidized still are finding their health care to be an awful lot to come out of pocket. here's where I'm driving with all that. I'm afraid the Affordable Care Act discussion has distracted us from the real issue, which is just the flat-out cost of health care. We can't have health care keep increasing at 6% a year when the rest of inflation goes up at 2 or 3% a year, because it just takes a bigger and bigger part of every budget. I make the joke all the time, the federal government is just about a big health insurance company that has an army attached to it. Okay, but in state government, we're not that different when I look at the piece that Medicaid takes and then the rest of our health insurance. So we can't keep living in a country where health insurance inflation is at 5 or 6%, double what the rest of inflation is, because that's the problem. The hard thing is, how do you address that? Because once you start addressing that, then you're getting into people's pocketbooks in different ways, either things we're not covering or things that we used to pay providers that we're not anymore. And that's really difficult. But I think that's the national imperative right now is we have to do something to address the increasing cost of health care, or it doesn't matter. The debt we'll have to take on because of health care will swamp the need for affordable housing and everything else that we want to do. All right. Yes.
Hi, Governor.
My name is Stan Johnson. Hey, Stan.
Nice to see you again.
Thanks.
My name is Stan Johnson from Seed. When we first met, it was because I had a car dealership and there was people shooting across the street and got shot. You remember that?
I do.
Right, and my son asked you, how do you expect us to protect ourselves in this environment? So my question from that came from the holler to the hood. We've not seen the economic vibration or growth inside of those communities. How do we help you attach to us to be able to start talking about low income, inner city, and in the rural areas as well in the economic portion of our country?
Yeah, great question, Stan, and I like the way you ended that, because to be honest with you, the challenge is just the same in the very rural areas as it is in the very, very urban areas. But I'm going to go back to what I said before. It really is about providing that equal educational opportunity and the equal opportunity to get trained in the right way. When businesses come in to talk to us, they literally come in looking to say, how many folks do you have that have this kind of educational training? And today, the job demands are such that, like I said, I don't know what, I should know, but I don't remember the exact number of unfilled job positions that we have, but it is in the state, it's a tens of thousands of unfilled jobs. The problem we have is a mismatched job need requirement with job skill set. And so there's two things. Part of that is all of us in this room should be speaking to everyone saying, you have to make certain that your skill set is ready for today's economy. That's number one. But number two, some of it comes back, and I'll point the finger back at myself and other leaders. We haven't done a good job of allocating capital in the right way. The most important thing you do in your business is hire great people and allocate capital to the needs. And too often we've been allocating capital to yesterday's needs rather than training the folks we need. The example I give all the time is I was out at one of our technical schools and talking to a welding instructor, and I said, well, how many classes do you teach every semester? And he said, well, I teach 2. And I said, how many kids? He said, or how many students? He said, 20. And he said, oh, by the way, every one of those gets a job the minute they walk out of here. I said, well, why don't you teach more classes? He said, well, because you haven't given me the equipment to do it. What do lawyers say? Don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to, But the point is, we have to do a better job of making certain that we're allocating resources where the demands are, so that those folks that are in the neighborhoods that you serve and work with actually have the opportunity to reach out and get that training, because without it, we can't do it. The idea that Mayor Burchett or Mayor O'Hara or I are going to go find a business and we're going to tell them where to locate, it just doesn't work that way. They get to decide for themselves. And everybody's always like, why are you sending so many businesses to Nashville and Knoxville, et cetera? I mean, I hear that all the time. Businesses decide for themselves where they're going to go. But they're going to do that where they're convinced they can get the best return on their capital. And the best way for us to do that is show them they have the right workforce. So what we have to do is leaders do a better job of matching the skill set with where the demand is. Anybody else? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Susie with Manpower, and I did want to say congratulations on your low unemployment rate. I've just recently moved back to Knoxville, and I'm telling you it's low. Because when you're looking for people, it becomes very difficult. So that would be my question. Sometimes it's skills, sometimes it's just the ability to be the soft skills, the transportation. But I think my main question is, now where do we get the people? Do you see people moving into Tennessee?
Three things. I do see people moving in, but that's kind of the easy answer. I mean, we can do something about that by quality of life issues. That's number one. Number two, we have to do what I was talking with Stan about. We've got to train those. Like I said, you're saying we can't find folks, and Stan's saying, hey, I got a whole bunch of people that haven't felt this economic rebound you're talking about. So we've got to do a better job of matching that skill set. The third thing is this, and it's kind of the untalked about reality. We have an incredible amount of people in our state and really across the country who have just dropped out of the workforce. You know, they're not showing up in unemployment because they're not looking anymore. They've just given up. And some of those for various reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is the opioid challenge that we have. An incredible amount of people have just dropped out. And a lot of those are behind that, or issues of drug addiction are behind that. So when you hear all the talk about the opioid challenge in our country, no, it's not just, it's obviously personal tragedies in each one of those cases, but it's truly affecting our economy, the number of people who are they're just out of the workforce now. So those are three things. We can attract people, and that's all about establishing great cities and counties and places where people live. Number two, it's matching skill set. Number three, it's addressing some of these bigger societal issues that have just caused a lot of people to totally drop out. Let's see. Yeah, Mark.
Good afternoon, Governor Haslam. Roy Miller, an old principal in Knox County. Moreland Heights.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for all that you did for us during my time. Now, as a retired old principal, I have moved on and now working at Johnson University.
Oh, cool.
As the Dean
Sure.
of Education. And here with my colleagues as we celebrate our 125th year. To you I asked, and I thank you, and especially Rich Boyd, who pricked my heart a few years ago about the Drive to 55. And on behalf of your initiative for both seniors graduating and now adults, but looking at it through the lenses where I now serve at a private Christian university, I just ask, have you thought of, or if not, would you please consider liberal arts schools and colleges and universities and Christian universities and colleges that try so hard to connect to the pathway that has been provided for these students, but due to the fact that we have other requirements, it's very difficult for us to offer that four-year degree and then also hold true to our values and our commitments. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, and good to see you, Roy. Thanks. We probably should have a further conversation about what those things are that keep those four-year independent schools from being on that pathway. So I'm not certain I know specifically enough, but I will follow up. I'm obviously very familiar with the school and appreciative of what you all do. I just don't know enough about what the obstacles are to prevent that you're talking about, but be glad to have that conversation. Okay. Well, all right. That's a great example. Okay. This is a great example where policy hits reality. So one of the things we've learned is the longer it takes you to complete, the less chance you actually have to complete. So we actually have a bill out this year that would require a student who's getting any kind of state financial aid, whether it be Tennessee Promise, Hope Scholarship, anything, to finish 30 hours in 2 semesters. What Roy is saying is we have a lot of students who are having to work their way through school and do things, and sometimes it's not possible to do that with some of the students that are a part of their mission, and we're having those conversations, which I understand that. I still don't really, the challenge for us is we have too many people who are taking too long to finish, using state dollars to do it, and then never finishing. So we're in the middle of trying to come up with an answer to that problem specifically, Roy, but hopefully you understand where we're trying to go with getting people to finish on time. All right, maybe one more, and then I think it's time for me to go. Yeah, back in the back, Amy.
Hello, this is Deidre Harper, and my question is,
Deidre.
are there any state-funded programs that kind of act as a workforce development where maybe felons or individuals that choose not to go to college can go and get some of those job skills to get some of those jobs that are available?
We do, and I'll get somebody to follow up with you specifically on those programs. So one thing to remember, our Tennessee Reconnect works for any adult. It's not just recent high school graduates. If you're an adult in Tennessee, past the age of 25, and you don't already have a degree or certificate, you can go back to one of our technical schools or community schools and get 2 years free. So everybody, period, okay? So, but I will follow up with you. We do have a couple of programs. I can't remember them off of the top of my head right now to give the specific names of those. All right, let me wrap up, but let me do this. First of all, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I love the opportunity to be here. Second, I do have 10 months to go, and I don't want to be that body in the casket that everybody's saying, doesn't he look natural? But I don't want to pass up this opportunity without thanking those of you in this room. A lot of you all have been friends for a long time, and a lot of you allowed me to do this and helped me with it, and it has been an incredible honor and privilege to do it. The last thing would be I really do hope you'll have that mindset for yourself and for the people around you that we've expected too little of ourselves for too long, that we really can lead. We can do that as a city and county, and we can definitely do that as a state. Tennessee can be that state, whether it be in education and job recruitment or in just showing how states or how government should run. But in the end, like I said, I'm incredibly grateful. You all have been such generous friends, and I will always appreciate that. And 10 months from right now, we'll be back to being Knoxville residents on a full-time basis. Thanks so much.